thanks both of you for being here.
Thank you.
So Karen is the CEO of Barclays Private Bank and Overseas Services, and Rakefet is president and CEO of Leumi Group, which is currently the largest bank. Just recently got that title, the largest bank in Israel. And right before we came on stage, Rakefet said that Leumi is the oldest bank in Israel, and your CEO also of the quote-unquote newest bank. So can you tell us what that means?
Yes. So yes, Leumi is the largest bank in Israel and also the oldest bank in Israel. Actually, Leumi is almost 120 years old, much older than the state of Israel. Leumi was established here in London, 1902. And next to Leumi, we have Pepper. Pepper is our mobile-only bank for the millennials, and it is the youngest bank in Israel. So we have the oldest and the youngest.
Right.
Yes.
And you say it's for millennials. Is that how you market it specifically? Because that's really a pretty specific demographic.
Right. So yes, we market it for millennials, but actually it's only 2/3 of the customers who are millennials, and 1/3 are not. And I always say that the moment I knew we hit gold was when my husband, who happened to be my biggest critic, uses only Pepper and abandoned all his other bank accounts. So I knew we are there.
And he is a millennial, or?
Oh. This is not me.
I mean,
he is not.
Worth asking, right? All right, great. Well, I wanted to start with, Pepper is a good example of what we're talking about here with the digital banking revolution, but I wanted to start to throw some stats out there. This is from an Accenture study that trust in financial services firms is now at 40%. That's actually highest across industries. It's the same as the retail sector. And I would say pretty impressive for a decade after the recession, 40%. Utility companies, just for comparison, 20%. Social media firms, 17%. So there's this inherent sort of level of trust in the industry, which I think is important to keep in mind. And then there's also some interesting statistics about the use of a bank branch fell from 52% to 32%. So people that visited once a month fell 2 years ago, and the percentage using a mobile banking app regularly is pretty flat at 34%. So we see a drop-off in people going into physical brick and mortar banks, and then not huge growth, this is for the UK, not huge growth in mobile apps. And I think that that's just, it's sort of an interesting dynamic to keep in mind. Obviously, it is different market to market, but it kind of gets to the heart of the question. You're weighing customers' need for convenience against the demand of them maybe still wanting that personal touch. And I'm just curious sort of how you think about that when you think about bringing technology into the banking space, how you make sure you're not trading convenience for the personal human touch. Karen, can you talk about that?
Yeah, look, and it's a wonderful thing. I have a feeling that we're going to share a lot of, including being a very old bank. I think Barclays has been around 328 years or something. But how you bring that legacy to the new age, because it's not just for millennials, it's about changes in the way we do things. Exactly what you're pointing to, and I so love the stories of Pepper because we're all having to basically do that dynamic. How do you take something that is old and heavy and established and do something that's nimble and quick and really has this, we went from this process where we started with product-centric. How do we digitize products to make it more convenient? And then we went to client service, and now we're talking about client experience. So it's not stopping with what exactly the statistics that you're pointing to, saying not just how do we make life more convenient, but with financial services and all kinds of things now weaving themselves into the fabric of what we do. Imagine going to bed at night going, oh, and saying, hey Google, or hey Alexa, pay Khalil's school bill. Right? And having that just done. It's just done. Having that woven in. And the way that we're doing that is exactly, I think, a bit as was described. You're having to manage that footprint across the new things and being very nimble and innovative and thinking more widely, as well as holding the old stuff. The old stuff has to stay for two reasons, really, in my mind, and it is legacy. One of it is, there's a lot of regulation. It's hard to be nimble when you are, have such a long history. I'm sure you have the same one. At Barclays, because we've been around for so long, and we spend billions on technology every year, we would all love to spend those billions on innovation and new things, and how do we bring new experiences to clients. The reality is a large part of that has to be supporting old infrastructure, making sure that software and data, keeping data for regulatory reasons and others that we had for 20 or 30 years, making sure that that old software still works. So if we ever get called by a regulator, we can pull it back up. And that is a massive challenge. The other one is really important. And I think it's really important for financial institutions, not just as we think about client experience, but remembering our place in the ecosystem, our place in society. So we, generally speaking, when we think through branches, and we have the same observations as you, the people who physically need a branch is decreasing, right? We're finding ways to bring that interaction to many people. Yet, there are certain things that we watch out for. We have very close relationships with all of, not just our regulators, but local communities, local governments, et cetera. And that is, we want to be sure that there is a branch open for people in local communities. We want to make sure that there is an ATM available to people. And there was almost a bit of a game in the UK, who could pull out first and not be last man standing. And I'm a bit proud of, in terms of the institutional way that we've thought about it, to say, look, we have to make sure that we do fulfill the entirety of the need, both for clients who really, really think about being able to walk down the street and have their banking needs served, as well as people like your husband. And again, my husband's also my biggest credit, also not a millennial. But people.
So we share another thing.
Exactly. People who jump online and say, 15 minutes, I'm done. I have my credit card. I can use it anywhere, any place, with any account, finished.
Right.
So.
And so you've taken sort of with Pepper, your goal was to disrupt from within your bank. Can you just explain why you took that approach and what you did, how you got the culture of your institution to embrace that as well?
Okay, actually the culture was the main challenge.
Yeah.
And we do, as you said, we have two journeys. One is to adapt Leumi, incumbent Leumi, to the new world, like everybody does. And besides that, we decided to start from scratch with Pepper. The way we did it, we actually built it as a startup, incubated within Leumi, but as a startup. Mm-hmm. People are much younger. They are separated. They are in a different place. It was challenging to convince the people that we are not cutting the tree we are sitting on, that we are rather reinforcing the tree. It took some time, but I think they are there now. And one of the things that is interesting, that Pepper, when you look at the breakdown of the customers of Pepper, so Leumi's customers is only 32% of the customers, and Leumi's market share in retail is 25%. What does it mean? That actually we are disrupting ourselves, but we are disrupting the whole market.
Right.
Right, so we are not just taking clients from Leumi, from the whole market, so.
If I can just add, because I completely agree with you, Rakafet. Absolutely, it's the culture. It's the culture that's the hardest to change. And for those of you who've done finance, you think about sunk cost and you say, how do you leave that behind as an organization and say, it's not about reusing and leveraging, as I said, digitizing old product. It's literally about disruption. Right. And I feel as though that building that cultural change is the hardest part. I think the second real challenge that we have, and it's wonderful that you've done it, we have pockets, we build innovation, and our biggest point is leave them alone. Okay, don't require them to use anything else, because in most circumstances, the second big challenge we have is how do we think about people who don't feel that they need to build everything in-house, right? When we send billions on technology, it's hard for us to convince the institution. Actually, working in partnership, as we've seen recently with many financial institutions, whether it's Facebook or Apple or Google or Uber or any of them, how do we work better in partnership using the ecosystem that's out there and get away from this idea that the end-to-end with hundreds or thousands of software engineers has to be serviced and completely in-house. And that's also a massive cultural shift change, particularly when it comes to things like, security, for our customers, and making sure that that is the holy grail of everything that we would put out into the market.
I'm going to go to questions in just a bit, so please start thinking. But Rakafet, I wanted to ask, in terms of, we always talk about disrupt or an incumbent versus legacy, and is that the right? I'm sorry, incumbent versus a disruptor, and is that the right? I mean, I guess you got to that point of it sort of the line blurring or the partnerships being established between those two groups. Is that is that the right way to think about it? I mean, should we?
Yeah, actually, it's one. People always mix the challenger banks with digital applications of the incumbents. Mm-hmm. Many times they ask me, why did you need Pepper? You have Leumi.com, what we call Leumi Digital, right, which is a great app, actually the best in Israel. So why do you need Pepper? And there is a huge difference between the two, because Leumi.com is a digital skin over a non-digital body, because Leumi itself is almost, as we said, 120 years old, and it has lots of IT systems, all convoluted together, and on top of it, we build a digital skin. Okay, so it's like more like window dressing than the real thing. Now, when we build Pepper, Pepper is a new bank from scratch, and it was built on a new IT, a new technological system. So everything is much more up to date, and banking is real time, which we don't have in regular banks. Time to market for new products and connect to new fintechs is very, very short, and it's much more personalized. When you talked about the branches and you said, well, don't miss the touch, we think that Pepper is more personalized than the people in the branch. Because at the end of the day, when people come to branches, the staff don't remember each and every one of them. What you have in this app, which is very personalized, you have this AI basis. Mm-hmm. So it gives you the right tips and the right offers that is very, very specific to you, which is very, very personal.
Right.
You've just brought up such a wonderful point, because you're right, Chloe. You bring up branches, and we traditionally think about branches as being the thing that anchors us in the physical. The reality is it's almost the data that's worse. You know, literally decade upon decade of
right,
data, and it compounds itself in several manifestations. One of it is, where's the data stored? So all of the physical data that's actually stored, and I'm talking about the electronic use of that, and then all of the software that's built on top of that. And then, you know, we talk a lot about golden source data. So exactly it, time to market, golden source data. How do I go among, I don't know, 15, 20, 40 different systems to build up and actually figure out what data do I need from a client?
Hundreds.
I was going to try to not scare people.
That's the truth.
To try to grab that data and then launch a new product. Okay, the very basic thing. How do we go to the web, be nimble, be asset light as an institution? How do we do that? It is just such a mind-bogglingly difficult thing, both from an expense, from a golden data. How do we pull it all together? And then when you just think about again, I go back to always thinking about people, and this is a new age where people own their own data, okay? Whether it's regulatorily mandated or whether it's people own their own data. You can't simply say, we're going to create this golden source of data and move things because it's more convenient for us to bring you better service. To go back through millions and millions of clients and say, we would like to take these 16 manifestations of your data held across potentially hundreds of platforms and co-locate it in a single way in the cloud so that we can serve you better, is something that is very hard to achieve. And so when we talk about branches, that's the tip of the iceberg. And that's why I think, you know, Rakafet, you're spot on. If we want to be, and we see this so much more at Barclays, fine, BMB, you know, Barclays mobile app, best mobile app in the world, also skinned.
Yeah.
For the exact same. How do we deal with PSD2? Skinned.
Skinned, yeah. And that's the difference, because Pepper is the whole thing, the body.
Right, right. Are there any questions from the audience? It's early, I feel like. Oh, we have one over there. Great. Can you just remember to introduce yourself?
Hi, Sandra Wallace from DLA Piper, where we are trying to innovate, and lawyers are not typically very good at that. You talk about and you've been talking about, we heard yesterday some talk about innovation and AI and how people think it's critical, but they're not actually moving and implementing. And it sounds like that's absolutely what you're doing. And I think one of the challenges we have is people assume that innovation means they're going to lose their jobs. How do you bring, if you're introducing new things all the time and you've got the legacy and the established personnel that are not used to this sort of innovation, how do you bring them along with you? Is it a question of retraining? Is it a question of selling the message to them? Or how do you bring those people along that might be not used to that innovation that you're introducing all the time?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take it. I will just tell you that actually in Leumi, it's much harder because we have what we call a tenure employment. It means that whenever we start, people come at the age of 24, 26, and we employ them till they are 67. So we need do a lot to deal with this. And yes, everything you said. The main thing is to try to win their minds and hearts, that they will be convinced that you are taking the organization to the right place. And then they will go after you. Some of them, they need to see the success. They will not come before. But many of them, if you convince them, if you talk about it, if you lecture, it works. This is what we did.
Right. Gets to the question about culture again. Do you have anything to add to that, Karen?
Just, and look, it is a conundrum. I mean, we love innovation. We love use of AI. We love to launch new products. And, I think that's one of the things, particularly in the UK, our home market, that we pride ourselves on. What we're happy with, and again, we're changing the mindset about saying, how do we use a wider ecosystem to help us deliver that more quickly, but it's often the best ideas that come from in-house. So while we use automation, somebody's implementing the automation, and if we can use the people who are, we can retrain and upskill people to handle both sides of that. It's something that we're always very cognizant of, and we feel as though we have a wonderful talent pool. Investment in our colleagues is huge for us, but it does mean that we all have to move along with the industry and move to serve our clients better. And every single day, and that will require some heavy lifting and some rethinking about our overall workforce and how we work with people.
Great. Well, we are actually out of time. I'm sorry. But you can find maybe Karen and Rakafet afterwards if you have any questions. But we unfortunately have to move on to our next panel. But thank you so much to both of you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.